What happens when Hollywood royalty meets actual royalty and neither one is willing to back down? Tonight we're diving into one of the most explosive late-night television moments ever captured. A clash so intense that it ended with security being called and a guest being escorted off-set. This is the story of how a routine promotional interview turned into a battle of wits, egos, and public personas that nobody saw coming. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because this story gets wilder with every passing minute. And trust me, you're going to want to share your thoughts on what went down. The Jimmy Kimmel Live studio was buzzing with its usual pre-show energy. Crew members adjusted cameras, sound technicians ran final checks, and the audience settled into their seats, completely unaware they were about to witness television history in the making. Meghan Markle had arrived for what was supposed to be a straightforward promotional appearance, part of her media tour for a new charitable initiative she'd been spearheading. Jimmy Kimmel, known for his quick wit and ability to navigate even the most challenging celebrity interviews, had done his homework. His research team had prepared the usual talking points, carefully crafted questions that would generate laughs without crossing any lines, and backup topics in case the conversation needed steering. What nobody anticipated was that this particular guest would arrive with her own agenda, one that would put her on a collision course with the host from the very first question. As the show's iconic theme music faded and the applause died down, Jimmy flashed his trademark grin to the cameras. The audience was warm, responsive, exactly the kind of crowd that made for great television. Meghan walked onto the stage with the poise and confidence that had made her a global figure, waving to the audience as she took her seat across from Jimmy's desk. "Welcome back to the show," Jimmy began, his tone friendly and conversational. "We're here with Meghan Markle, and I have to say it's great to have you here. How are you doing?" "I'm doing wonderfully, Jimmy. Thank you for having me," Meghan replied, settling into her chair with a smile that seemed genuine enough to the studio audience, but carried an edge that Jimmy, with his years of experience reading guests, immediately picked up on. "Now, I know you're here to talk about your new foundation work, which sounds incredible, by the way, but I have to ask," Jimmy leaned forward slightly, employing the casual, conversational tone that had made him a late-night staple. "How are you finding life outside of all the royal protocol? I mean, you can actually speak your mind now without having to run everything past a team of advisors, right?" The question seemed innocent enough, the kind of light-hearted inquiry that guests typically laughed off or used as a springboard to share a funny anecdote. But something in Meghan's expression shifted, a subtle tightening around her eyes that suggested Jimmy had just stepped onto dangerous ground without realizing it. "Well, Jimmy," Meghan's voice remained pleasant, but there was a precision to her words that hadn't been there moments before. "I think there's a misconception that I couldn't speak my mind before. I've always been someone who stands up for what I believe in, regardless of the circumstances or the institution I was part of." Jimmy sensed the slight shift in tone but pressed forward, thinking he could lighten the mood with humor. "Right, of course, but you have to admit there's probably a little more freedom now to, really let loose. I mean, when you were in the royal family, could you have gone on a show like this and just, really told us what you thought about everything?" "I'm curious, Jimmy," Meghan said, and now her smile had definitely changed, becoming more calculated. "What exactly do you think I should be telling you? What is it that you're hoping I'll say that I supposedly couldn't say before?" The studio audience, still mostly oblivious to the undercurrent of tension building between host and guest, chuckled at what they assumed was playful banter. Jimmy, however, was beginning to realize that his usual interview tactics weren't going to work with this particular guest. "I'm not hoping for anything specific," Jimmy said, attempting to regain control of the conversation. "I just think people are curious about your experience, about what it was really like. The behind-the-scenes stuff that people don't get to see." "The behind-the-scenes stuff," Meghan repeated, and there was definitely an edge to her voice now. "You mean like how I was treated by the media? or how certain members of the press seemed determined to create narratives that had nothing to do with reality. Is that the kind of behind-the-scenes information you're fishing for? Jimmy felt the interview slipping away from him, but he was experienced enough to know that sometimes the best approach was to lean into the tension rather than try to deflect it. Look, I think people just want to understand your perspective. You've been through a lot of public scrutiny, probably more than most people could handle. How do you deal with that? How do I deal with scrutiny, Jimmy? Meghan's voice was still, controlled, but there was fire behind it now. I deal with it by telling the truth, even when people don't want to hear it. I deal with it by refusing to be silenced by institutions or individuals who think they can control the narrative about my life. The audience was starting to sense that this wasn't typical celebrity interview banter. The energy in the room had shifted, becoming more charged, more unpredictable. Jimmy could feel it too, and his instinct was to try to steer the conversation back to safer ground. Absolutely, and I think that's admirable, he said, employing his most diplomatic tone. But sometimes when we're in the public eye, we have to accept that people are going to have opinions, and not all of them are going to be favorable. I mean, that's just part of the territory, right? Meghan's eyes flashed, and for a moment, Jimmy wondered if he'd just made a serious mistake. Part of the territory? She repeated. Jimmy, are you suggesting that the kind of treatment I received, the racist undertones, the deliberate misrepresentation of everything I said and did, that's just something I should have accepted as part of the territory? The studio had gone noticeably quieter. This was no longer a light-hearted late-night interview. This was something else entirely. Something that neither the audience nor the production team had been prepared for. Jimmy found himself in the uncomfortable position of having accidentally triggered a much deeper conversation than he'd intended. I'm not suggesting that at all, Jimmy said carefully. I think racism is completely unacceptable. And if that's what you experienced, then that's terrible. I guess what I'm trying to understand is how you separate legitimate criticism from the unfair stuff. Legitimate criticism? Meghan's voice rose slightly, and Jimmy realized he'd somehow made things worse. Jimmy, what exactly do you think I should be legitimately criticized for? For marrying someone I love? For trying to modernize an institution that desperately needed it? For speaking up about issues I care about? Jimmy was now in completely uncharted territory. His usual arsenal of jokes and deflections felt inadequate for the intensity of emotion that Meghan was bringing to the conversation. He glanced quickly at his producers in the wings, but they looked just as uncertain about how to handle the situation as he felt. I don't think you should be criticized for any of those things, Jimmy said, trying to find solid ground. I think what people sometimes struggle with is understanding the difference between your public role and your private feelings. When you're part of an institution like the royal family, there are probably expectations about how you handle disagreements privately versus publicly. Privately versus publicly, Meghan said, and Jimmy could tell from her tone that he'd somehow stepped into another minefield. Jimmy, when the private channels fail you, when the institution refuses to protect you or your family, when they actively work against you, what exactly do you suggest someone should do? Just suffer in silence for the sake of maintaining appearances? Jimmy felt the weight of the studio's attention pressing down on him. Every camera operator, every audience member, every producer watching from the wings could sense that this interview had crossed into territory that none of them had anticipated. He'd conducted thousands of interviews, navigated political controversies, handled celebrities having meltdowns, but something about this particular moment felt different. More personal, more dangerous. I think, Jimmy said, choosing his words very carefully, that most people would agree that there are always multiple ways to handle difficult situations. Sometimes working within the system, even when it's frustrating, can be more effective than making everything public. Meghan's laugh was sharp, cutting through the studio air like a blade. Working within the system, Jimmy? The same system that Leaked stories about me to the press while refusing to correct obvious lies? The same system that questioned my children's heritage before they were even born? Tell me, what part of that system was I supposed to work with? The audience had gone completely silent now. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was something raw and real, and Jimmy could feel the show slipping away from him entirely. His producers were making frantic gestures from behind the cameras, but he wasn't sure if they wanted him to cut to commercial, change the subject, or somehow find a way to salvage what was quickly becoming a disaster. "Look, Meghan," Jimmy said, abandoning his usual jovial persona entirely, "I think we're getting into some pretty heavy territory here. I wasn't trying to attack you or minimize what you went through. I was just trying to have a conversation." "A conversation?" Meghan's voice was incredulous. "Jimmy, you invited me on your show, presumably to talk about my charitable work, and instead you've spent the entire time questioning my decisions, suggesting I should have handled my own mistreatment differently, and implying that I somehow brought the negative attention on myself." Jimmy felt a flash of frustration. He'd been trying to be respectful, trying to ask the questions that his audience would want answered, and somehow every single thing he said was being twisted into an attack. "That's not what I was doing at all. I was trying to understand your perspective, but you're making it sound like asking any questions about your experience is somehow offensive." "Asking questions isn't offensive, Jimmy," Meghan shot back, her composure finally showing real cracks. "But the way you're asking them, the assumptions built into every single question, the suggestion that I should have just quietly accepted being treated poorly for the sake of some greater good, that's what's offensive." The tension in the studio was now palpable. Jimmy could see members of the audience shifting uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether they should be witnessing this exchange. His usual instinct would be to make a joke, to find some way to lighten the mood, but every fiber of his being told him that any attempt at humor right now would be disastrous. "I never suggested you should accept being treated poorly," Jimmy said, his own voice rising slightly. "But I think there's a difference between standing up for yourself and airing private family matters on international television. Some people might see that as crossing a line." "Some people might see that as crossing a line," Meghan repeated, and Jimmy immediately realized he'd made another mistake. "Jimmy, are you one of those people? Do you think I crossed a line by telling my own story when no one else would tell it accurately?" Jimmy was trapped now, and he knew it. If he said yes, he'd be openly criticizing her, which would make for terrible television and probably end his relationship with her representatives permanently. If he said no, he'd be contradicting the point he'd just made, which would make him look weak and indecisive. "I think," Jimmy said slowly, "that everyone has the right to tell their own story. But I also think that when you're part of a family, especially a very public family, there are consequences to how you choose to tell that story." "Consequences," Meghan said, and there was something dangerous in her voice now. "Jimmy, are you threatening me? Are you suggesting there should be consequences for me speaking the truth about my own life?" The studio erupted in a low murmur of shocked voices. Jimmy's eyes widened as he realized how his words had been interpreted. "No, that's not what I meant at all. I wasn't threatening anyone. I was just saying that actions have reactions. That's all." "Actions have reactions." Meghan nodded slowly. "So when I was being subjected to racist coverage in the press, when my mental health was being destroyed, when my family was being attacked, I should have considered what the reactions might be to defending myself? I should have weighed whether my own well-being was worth potentially making some people uncomfortable?" Jimmy felt like he was drowning. Every response he gave seemed to dig him deeper into a hole he hadn't even realized he was digging. The audience was completely silent now, watching this exchange with the kind of horrified fascination usually reserved for car accidents. "That's not what I'm saying," Jimmy insisted. "I'm not saying you shouldn't defend yourself. I'm just saying that maybe there could have been other ways to handle the situation that wouldn't have been so, I don't know, so nuclear." Nuclear? Meghan's voice was deadly quiet now. Jimmy, you think me telling the truth about my own experiences was nuclear? You think a woman speaking honestly about racism and mental health struggles is somehow an overreaction? Jimmy could feel sweat forming on his forehead. The studio lights, which had never bothered him before in his career, suddenly felt unbearably hot. I didn't say it was an overreaction. I just think that when you're dealing with family issues, sometimes it's better to handle them privately. Family issues, Meghan repeated, and Jimmy could tell from her tone that he'd somehow made things even worse. Jimmy, we're not talking about a disagreement over holiday plans. We're talking about systematic racism, about mental health crises, about the safety of my children. Are those the kinds of things you think should be handled privately? The audience was shifting restlessly now, and Jimmy could hear whispered conversations breaking out. His producers were making increasingly frantic gestures, but he couldn't tell what they wanted him to do. End the interview? Keep going? Try to salvage something from this disaster? I think, Jimmy said, his voice strained, that some things are more effectively addressed through private channels than through public interviews. Private channels? Meghan laughed, but there was no humor in it. Jimmy, the private channels failed me completely. The private channels were part of the problem. When private channels fail, when institutions refuse to protect the people they're supposed to care about, what exactly do you suggest those people do? Jimmy was running out of options. Every attempt to moderate his position was being met with more intense pushback, and he was starting to feel genuinely angry. Look, I'm not saying the situation wasn't difficult for you. I'm not saying you didn't have legitimate grievances. But surely you can understand why some people might feel that washing family laundry in public isn't the best way to resolve conflicts. Washing family laundry? Meghan's voice was ice cold now. Jimmy, is that what you think I was doing? You think my experiences with racism were just dirty laundry that I should have kept hidden away? The studio had gone so quiet that Jimmy could hear the hum of the air conditioning system. He looked out at the audience and saw faces that ranged from uncomfortable to openly shocked to genuinely angry. Some people were shaking their heads, others were whispering to their neighbors, and a few were looking like they might actually get up and leave. That's not what I meant, Jimmy said weakly. But even he could hear how unconvincing he sounded. Then what did you mean, Jimmy? Meghan leaned forward in her chair, her eyes locked on his. Because it sounds to me like you think I should have suffered in silence, rather than make anyone uncomfortable with the truth about what I experienced. Jimmy stared across his desk at Meghan, feeling like he was facing down a force of nature that he had completely underestimated. The woman sitting across from him bore little resemblance to the polished diplomatic figure who had walked onto his stage 20 minutes earlier. This version of Meghan Markle was raw, unfiltered, and absolutely relentless in her pursuit of what she clearly saw as justice. I think we need to take a step back here, Jimmy said, his voice betraying the desperation he was feeling. This conversation has gotten way more intense than either of us probably intended. Has it, Jimmy? Meghan's voice was razor sharp. Or is this exactly the conversation you wanted to have? Did you bring me on your show hoping I'd just smile and deflect while you questioned every decision I've made to protect myself and my family? Jimmy felt something snap inside him. He'd spent his entire career being professional, being diplomatic, finding ways to make even the most difficult guests comfortable. But sitting across from someone who seemed determined to paint him as a villain no matter what he said was pushing him past his breaking point. You know what, Meghan? Jimmy's voice was harder now, his famous affability completely gone. I brought you on my show because I thought you might actually want to have a real conversation. But instead, you've turned every single question into an attack on your character. And frankly, I'm getting a little tired of being treated like I'm some kind of racist monster for asking normal interview questions. The audience audibly gasped. Jimmy Kimmel, the consummate professional who had navigated countless controversial interviews without losing his cool, had just openly confronted his guest on live television. Meghan's eyes flashed with something that looked almost like satisfaction, as if Jimmy had finally revealed what she'd been waiting for him to show. "Normal interview questions," Meghan said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Jimmy, tell me what's normal about spending an entire interview questioning why someone spoke up about their own mistreatment. Tell me what's normal about suggesting that a woman should have handled racism and mental health crises differently." "I never questioned your right to speak up," Jimmy shot back, his professional composure completely abandoned now. "I questioned the way you chose to do it. There's a difference between standing up for yourself and burning down everything around you in the process." "Burning down everything around me?" Meghan's voice rose for the first time during the entire interview. "Jimmy, what exactly do you think I burned down? What did I destroy by telling the truth about my own life?" "You destroyed any chance of reconciliation with your family," Jimmy said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "You made it impossible for anyone to have a relationship with you without taking sides. You turned private pain into public entertainment." The studio went dead silent. Even the cameras seemed to stop moving as everyone absorbed what Jimmy had just said. Meghan stared at him for a long moment, and Jimmy could see something shifting in her expression, something that made his stomach drop. "Public entertainment," Meghan repeated slowly. "Jimmy, is that what you think my pain is? Entertainment?" Jimmy realized he'd crossed a line that there was no coming back from, but he was too angry and too frustrated to care anymore. "I think you've made a career out of your grievances, and I think some people are getting tired of hearing about how hard your life has been when you've had opportunities that most people can only dream of." The audience erupted in shocked murmurs and angry voices. Several people were clearly upset. Some were standing up, and Jimmy could see his producers frantically trying to figure out how to handle what was rapidly becoming a complete disaster. Meghan stood up slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. "Jimmy, I want to make sure I understand what you just said. You think that because I've had opportunities, I should have accepted racist treatment silently? You think that because I married into privilege, I forfeited the right to speak about discrimination?" Jimmy was standing now too, his anger overriding his common sense. "I think that when you have a platform and influence, you have a responsibility to use it constructively instead of just settling scores and making everyone around you look bad." "Making everyone around me look bad?" Meghan's voice was shaking. Now, but not with sadness or fear. She was vibrating with pure rage. "Jimmy, I didn't make anyone look bad. I told the truth about how they treated me. If that made them look bad, maybe they should examine their own behavior instead of blaming me for talking about it." "The truth, according to you," Jimmy shot back. "Your version of events, your interpretation of what happened. But there are always two sides to every story, aren't there?" Meghan's face went completely white. "Two sides, Jimmy? What's the other side of racism? What's the other side of driving someone to contemplate suicide? Please, enlighten me about what the other perspective might be on those experiences." Jimmy felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, but he couldn't seem to stop himself from jumping. "Maybe the other side is that sometimes people face criticism for legitimate reasons, and playing the race card isn't always the appropriate response." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. The audience was in complete uproar, now with people shouting, booing, and several individuals heading for the exits. Meghan stared at Jimmy with an expression that was beyond anger, beyond hurt, something approaching pure contempt. "Playing the race card," she said, her voice barely above a whisper but somehow audible throughout the entire studio. Jimmy Kimmel just told a biracial woman that she was playing the race card when discussing her experiences with racism. Jimmy's face went pale as he realized what he'd just said, but it was far too late to take it back. The damage was done, the words were out there, and everyone in the studio had heard them. "That's not what I meant," Jimmy started to say, but Meghan cut him off. "That's exactly what you meant, Jimmy. And now everyone knows exactly who you really are." Meghan stepped away from her chair, her dignity intact despite the chaos around her. "I came on your show to talk about charitable work, about making a positive difference in the world. Instead, you've spent the entire time attacking me, questioning my motives, and now suggesting that my experiences with racism weren't real. Meghan, please, let's just calm down and—" Jimmy began, but she was having none of it. "Don't you dare tell me to calm down." Meghan's voice cut through the studio noise like a sword. "You just invalidated every racist experience I've ever had, and you want me to calm down?" Jimmy's producers were now openly gesturing for security, realizing that this interview had spiraled completely beyond their control. The audience was becoming increasingly agitated, with some people clearly on Meghan's side, and others appearing to support Jimmy, creating a divide that threatened to turn ugly. "I think we need to end this interview," Jimmy said, looking desperately toward his producers. "Oh, we're definitely ending this interview," Meghan said, her voice carrying clearly across the chaos. "But not because you want to. We're ending it because I refuse to sit here and be insulted by someone who clearly has no understanding of what racism actually looks like." Security personnel were moving toward the stage now, not because Meghan posed any physical threat, but because the situation had become so volatile that they needed to restore order. Meghan saw them coming and held up her hand. "I don't need an escort," she said loudly, her voice carrying over the crowd noise. "I'm perfectly capable of walking out of here on my own." She turned back to Jimmy one final time. "Jimmy, I hope someday you'll understand what you've revealed about yourself tonight. I hope you'll think about why you felt the need to attack someone for speaking their truth." "Meghan, I wasn't attacking you," Jimmy said weakly, but his words were lost in the commotion. "Yes, you were," Meghan replied simply, "and everyone saw it." With that, she walked off the stage with her head held high, leaving behind a studio in complete chaos, an audience divided and angry, and a host who was only beginning to understand the magnitude of what had just transpired. As the security team followed her to ensure she made it safely to her car, the cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment of what would undoubtedly become one of the most talked-about late-night television disasters in history. What started as a routine promotional interview had ended with a guest walking off set after a confrontation that exposed deeper tensions about race, privilege, and accountability in ways that nobody had anticipated. So there you have it, one of the most explosive celebrity interviews ever recorded, a clash that revealed more about both participants than either probably intended. What do you think? Was Jimmy out of line, or did Meghan overreact? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, hit that subscribe button for more incredible behind-the-scenes stories, and let me know what other celebrity confrontations you'd like me to cover next.